All right, so welcome to our webinar, and we've titled it Technology Can Bring the Human Touch. So today we are hoping to talk about a few things. We are hoping to tell you who we are at TechTorch and what we do. Spoiler alert, we will be talking a lot about digital change, and we hope to do this through the lens of looking at HR. And after that, we will go through some ways that TechTorch can help you define the future of your HR function and meet your business goals. And finally, hopefully, we will wrap this all together by showing you some short, relatable examples of how you can use our product to do this. All right, so who are we? We at TechTorch, I think we appropriately said it here. So we are a single space to simplify and accelerate digital change. And we do this through a few different ways. The first way is we have a knowledge base. So we take what the best companies have done for various different business functions. We pre-package them and put them together in what we call a use case. And this is something that our customers can go to our app and take off the shelf and tailor to their needs to help them get to where they define as their future. The second part is we are a smart marketplace. So we give you the tools to try really important SaaS tools and technology before you buy them through an integrated simulation. And it saves you a lot of time. You don't have to go to demos yourself. You don't have to do a lot of research yourself. We give you a lot of the information in an easy to understand way. And then lastly, we are a platform. So hence the single space. You can use us to design your future state business. You can collaborate with your team, test out different technology, and then in the future, you'll be able to monitor how you are progressing towards your defined business goals. Whoops. All right, so for some people introductions, we have some key TechTorch team members here today. The first one is we have our CEO and fearless leader, Jordi Moncada. If you need anything from him, here is his mobile and address. Just kidding, but he'll be fielding questions in the chat. And then we also have our Chief Product Officer here today, Miguel Vasconcelos. And then last but not least is you've got myself, Samantha, and Andy. And we are respectively the leaders of the content team and the product team at TechTorch. So listed below is some of our previous experiences. So we've got a range of experiences.
Someone in the driveway, is that like a gray truck?
Oh, hey Wendy, would you mind muting? Sorry. So basically, if there's a job out there, we've probably done it between all of us at TechTorch, and we bring decades of consulting, operations, business, and product experience. All right, so I will hand it over to Andy to start off our HR conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And we really want this to be conversational, so guys, please jump in. We don't just want to listen to Sam and I sort of monologue back and forth between us, but really just to frame up the conversation. The pressure to modernize HR is increasing. And so I've got sort of just 4 general buckets here. But what really is challenging is you'll see we have post-pandemic recalibrations, role-based to skill-based, employee experience, HR localization. While a lot of these sound straightforward in title, what they really mean when we're translating that into our HR function and our HR operations gets quite complicated. So post-pandemic recalibrations really is this umbrella term for all the ways in which our employee expectations have changed, often for the better as a result of the pandemic, but what it means for our comp and benefits, our workforce planning, et cetera, starts to be very complicated when we sort of come back to this new way of working and this new way of operating. We saw role-based and skill-based shifts within HR happening pre-pandemic, and with a lot of positive impacts, especially around making the jobs more equitable and really appealing to greater diversity of talent. But so much of our existing HR structures are still are based on this role-based setup. So the way we write our job descriptions, all the way through to the way we do performance management and talent planning. Moving on to employee experience. Again, we started to look at this pre-pandemic, but we have to rethink this entirely coming out of the pandemic. Really around, when I was at Nike, we actually had dedicated a whole organization to this. So really continuing to take that customer mindset around how our employees experience our organizations, but translating that into the operational way in which you interact with not just within HR, but even within other sort of functions that impact your experience is becoming increasingly important. And last, as we look at this sort of globalization of talent, the complications of localizing your HR function continues to increase. So I've got a screenshot here from Oyster. We see Remote, Deal, Oyster, all unicorn HR startups in the last 2 years, all trying to solve for this same issue of how do you manage a very, very decentralized workforce from a compliance perspective, from a comp perspective, from a development perspective, from just a holiday, a pay and time. All of that implementation starts to get quite complicated. So a lot of pressures in the HR space, to sum that up.
All right. So when we think about digital change and we think about technology's role in digital change, though we at TechTorch believe that the business should really drive what you're looking for when it comes to technology, we definitely cannot ignore tech. So we are saying that technology is no longer just about cost savings and process improvements. It's definitely essential, especially when it comes to HR in various aspects. So when you're looking for talent, you need to have that cutting edge technology to help you do that. And after you find the good talent, when you have employees, you need to ensure that you're satisfying, really exceeding their expectations to minimize churn and attrition. So through our experiences, we've seen companies go through digital change, and it's pretty safe to say that we can predict these common missteps that companies do while doing change. So here are some of the key things that we've seen. So companies start too big. They start by just ripping out their foundation and legacy system, and this is creating the need for an entire enterprise-wide transformation, which is time-consuming, requires a lot of buy-in, a lot of people, and a lot of uncomfortable change all at once. The second thing that we see is a lot of times companies will have these islands of really good SaaS technology and tools, but they're very fragmented and they're not connected, so they don't talk to each other. It still requires a lot of manual efforts from your people to get information from one system to another. And then the next one is we often see companies that just aren't maximizing their previous technology investment. So you might have the latest and greatest tools and technology, but if you don't know how to use them to their full potential, you're not getting the most out of your investment. And we've also seen, I think we can probably all relate to this, but in previous jobs I've had, I didn't even know that my company had some technology. And so it was just going unused by multiple people in the company. And lastly, what I led with is doing technology without business. So I think currently a lot of us are seeing a disconnect between business and technology. They often don't work together. And in any company, a lot of the supporting functions, you're not doing them for their own sake. You're doing them for the success of your business and your business goals. So having a clear idea of what you need to do in order to get to your future state is key when it comes to technology. All right.
Thanks. So getting to a bit of what we see as ways to mitigate or move around some of those common missteps is really through this concept of modularizing your digital change. So we got 4 ways we think about that. The first is really around not reinventing the wheel. So a little bit of what our sort of business is based on is that there are existing best practices, right? We know what good looks like across industry. And so starting with that, so starting with those best practices saves a lot of, energy within your organization and time. And really then you can spend on that focusing of localization and making it right for your business. And a way that you can do that is by using these best practices, translating them into sort of the core scenarios that will guide your design. What is most important to get right? What is the thread we care most about as it relates to this digital change? The next is being really, really specific with your outcomes. So again, when we look at sometimes these large transformation efforts, when we want to rip out the foundation, we get really broad. And so what we found is that getting very modular, getting very specific, and just picking a few outcomes and associated KPIs can really accelerate your efforts. But what's important is we think about this third one, which is really around macro vision targeted testing. So we can't lose that greater perspective on where we want to go as an organization. And so we do want to spend some time thinking about this more macro perspective from a business capability perspective, and then from a system architecture perspective. But then we want to go deep with the areas that we need to design and implement. And finally, sort of moving beyond agile in nature. So I think all organizations, or most organizations, have adopted agile in some ways, but we're still sort of learning what that means. So again, sort of holding ourselves really accountable to get to implementation as quickly as possible, and really having an emphasis on monitoring tangible results. So getting to that scenario, getting it live within your organization, and monitoring those benefits, keeping that cycle as sort of condensed as we can, really will accelerate this sort of modular approach.
Awesome. So when we think about how do we do this? How do we at TechTorch propose that you do digital change? And we have defined 4 key phases. So when we look at traditional transformations and digital change, it usually takes months, years, maybe decades, maybe a cycle of that. But so what we're saying is, if you make the change, like Andy was mentioning earlier, if you make the change modular enough and bite-sized enough, you can do really impactful, practical change in a few weeks. So we're giving the example of an agile sprint here, where you would need to assess your gaps. So you would conduct some sort of current state capability maturity assessment, which basically just means when you look at the capabilities that you need to do to be successful in whatever business function that you're trying to change, how far away are you currently from what you hope to get to? You need to understand what you're trying to get to. So you're like manifesting the business change. So what does good look like to you? Where do you see yourself in the future? And from that, you can define your goals that you're trying to achieve. Secondly, when you're designing your future, I mentioned this in the beginning, you don't want to start from scratch. So you want to leverage what's already been done and what the best companies out there are doing. So you would leverage some of our TechTorch use cases as a place to start. And then you would take those, tailor them to your specific business, to your specific needs, to your specific company size. And then you can use our tool and our interface to socialize a lot of these changes that you're trying to make, get clear buy-in, and have a record of decisions that you've made during the design process. The next step is you can try and select SaaS tools. So after you've defined your business goals and have a really clear idea of where you're going and how much effort it's going to take to get there, you can say, what technology do I need to support me in this business transformation? So you can try several different technologies, see them interact with your data, your needs, say, maybe this one's not right for me, let me try another one. So you can really put yourself in the shoes of the user who will be using this technology on a day-to-day basis to say, which one is the right choice for me? And then lastly, after you do this initial, leap to make the change, you want to make sure that you're embodying a change mindset in your teams and your processes going forward. So you're doing the new processes you've defined, you're monitoring them to see how are we progressing to meet our business goals that we defined in step 1. And then you're maintaining the momentum through clear actions that you can get from real-time data, and you can monitor all of this in our TechTorch app. Okay, so I hope everyone did have their coffee this morning or whatever gets you up and moving. We're hoping to have a conversation about specifically HR. So this is what an HR landscape looks like at a company. And we see some key places where companies need to change. If we look at the bottom, talent acquisition. I think we've all seen this in the news and the headlines recently, that people and companies are having a hard time finding the right talent for their needs. And a lot of times it starts with defining your needs. What do you need and why do you need people? So does anybody want to share or comment on something that they're working on and maybe an area that they think they need to change or something they see coming in the future? Don't be shy. If not, we can get moving to our demo to show you what TechTorch is all about.
I was going to ask, this is Rod. I was going to ask one quick question or point out one issue that's always been an issue, a problem with hiring new talent, and that's you spend all this time recruiting, making offers, some cases sign-on bonus and so forth, and then most companies do very little to onboard them. So that connection of finding the talent and then onboarding with what they're supposed to do or what the company is and the culture and so forth. How do you close that gap?
Sure. So from my perspective, there definitely is an integration between a lot of these different processes. So moving from talent acquisition, you're absolutely right. Going from after you find the right people and get them in the door, how do you then keep the momentum going and get them really set up for success for their role? So you need to have a transition between the talent acquisition process and the onboarding. And onboarding really starts before you agree on your offer, and then it should really end never. So onboarding is no longer just, okay, a few weeks after you start, let's get you trained. It should be, let's check in to see how you're doing. What are your goals when you're at the company? So it's really about engaging with the talent that you've acquired to continue that relationship. So we don't see this like, I don't know, I guess disillusionment or almost like bait and switch. Like you put all this effort in to get me into your company, and now what? So you have to maintain that relationship with the employee after they're already in the door. And then Andy, if you feel differently or have anything else to add, feel free.
No, I agree. I think one of the hard handoffs is, HR and obviously the hiring manager go through a lot of effort to get you in the door, and then the effort often to do a lot of this onboarding tends to fall back on business teams who are already quite busy, right? It's the hiring manager, it's teammates who suddenly have extra work, so to speak, in order to onboard teammates. And so really, I think there has been, I think there's a transition away from onboarding as this checklist. Frequently it was like, let's get you your computer, check, you met with your mentors, check, right? We see this sort of list form onboarding to something that's maturing in a much more engaging way. So if we think about the development cycle really starting when they first come into the door and thinking about that learning and development experience in a much more robust way, because it really is a learning and development moment, right? But we think about that as a post-performance appraisal activity, but something that's certainly maturing and hopefully taking away some of that stress of teammates to do that work, to be teachers, maybe beyond what they should be.
Sam, one of the questions, I guess, or reflection is that we've been talking to a lot of companies that are going through this digitization process of how these beautiful, I don't know how to call this, matrix varies for small companies versus large companies. I think what we see is a lot of small companies that are duct taping HR until they get to, and duct taping means outsourcing it to some platforms like gusto.com or Trinet, and then they get to a point where they think, oh, we got to bring it in-house. And so all of a sudden lights on these quadrants start to blip, like, hey, you don't have any process to recruit well or to onboard or to do performance management. And then how it changes as you grow, when you have all this kind of different technologies into more much of a what's our experience end to end. I don't know if you can comment on that, kind of that transition from not needing HR, needing HR, phase one of digitization, growing, and then headaches about experience and skill based and stuff like this. So it seems like there's a journey, right, in the growth of companies as they travel through this HR digitization.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that that's a good point, Jordi, is there is a shift. A lot of the drivers that we talked about in the beginning of this discussion are now forcing companies to look at HR as, I guess, not just a supporting function or not just a cost center where money and time and effort shouldn't be prioritized, but you really need to focus on your HR function. Specifically, I think a good place for companies to start, small companies too, is the talent acquisition process, because you need to find good people. I think maybe with a few caveats, but most businesses require people to make it work. And if you don't have the right people for what you're trying to do, then the subsequent and cascading processes won't be able to be done to their full potential. So I think a good place to start, and I think what we at TechTorch have prioritized, is helping companies build up their talent acquisition process. So this means a few things. It means, what is your employer brand? I think you have to ask yourself that. Like, when applicants see your business, how do you want them to see you? And how do you want them to perceive you? So there's a strategy element to it. And I think that there is an employee experience element to it as well, because you want your employer brand to be organic in a way. You don't want it to just come from deliberate ads or campaigns. You want it to come from people who work at your company to say, oh, well, I really enjoy working at this company, to their friends, their family, people they know, their own network. And so I guess it's more, what I'm trying to say is that it's more of a holistic effort, but I think a good place to start is the talent acquisition aspect of HR for a company of any size, but I think specifically those small companies that are starting to beef up their HR functionality.
Yeah.
Do we have any other comments or questions? Oh, Andy, I think you are muted.
I was just saying we had one about modular approach, but I think we got it covered in the chat. I think we're good.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right. I think this actually is a good segue, I think, to our next part of the discussion, which is where we'll be talking about how two different companies, so they're different in size, different in revenue, different in their needs, how they could come to TechTorch and use the same use case, but based on their needs, they would get different pieces of value out of it. So let's start with number one. So this goes really well to what Jordi was saying. So I'm a small company. I'm just trying to build the foundation. I don't have any HR functionalities. I don't have a really efficient way to start getting really good talent that I need. So give me 1 second and I will pull up our app. All right. Okay, so you, as your small software company, say, I need some assistance. I need to build up my talent acquisition capabilities. I need to find the best people. So who else do I call besides TechTorch? So you go to TechTorch, you would log in, and then you'd be presented with your dashboard. And as a new person, you would have no use cases available. So what you would want to do is you would go to our library of our prepackaged curated use cases that I was mentioning. And then you can see some of our solutions that we already have, but we want to focus on people today. So I would go to people, and then I would select talent acquisition, So we are offering our talent acquisition use case for free as a way that for you to see the value in TechTorch. So you would click use, and then you would go back to your dashboard. And you would see the use case that you selected in your own personal library. So then let me just give you an overview of some of our use case elements. So we have our use case overview, and this can be curated to your needs. This is an example from one of our customers where they wanted to build like their homepage as a landing page. So it has a compilation of some links to other sections of the use case. So you would look at your outcomes, going back to our methodology. Step 1 is defining where you want to go. What does your future state look like? And these are some, you can get some direction by deciding, so what KPIs am I going to measure myself against as I do this transformation? And then another key aspect is you would look at the capabilities, going back to that maturity assessment that I mentioned. So these are our L2 and L3 capabilities. So for talent acquisition, we have planning, and then you would see here are some L3 capabilities. You would gauge how mature you are in them, and you would indicate if they're a priority. So something that I think we can focus on today is candidate sourcing. So how you find the right people, going back to Jordy's point, is what is the most critical part for small businesses, and I think this is definitely one. And then when you think about defining your future state processes and what you want to get, I think it's important to think about who is your end user or who your customer is. So in this case, it would be the applicant. So you can go in with your team and define what you want that journey for the applicant to look like. So this can be changed based on your needs or based on your specific business. And then after that, you would go through and think, okay, when I do a change or a transformation, what kind of decisions am I going to need to make? So we give you some things to consider. Again, you can add other decisions as they are applicable to your company and your business. And then we give you some options and kind of tell you what are the implications that come with those options. And you'll have a record of what you decide with your team. So then we go even further into defining our process flows. So again, this can be changed and tailored to your business. You can move things around. You can update texts and details of each step. And you can also add, if you have linking documentation that you would want to have for, I guess, posterity. So as you evolve, you would want to see what you decided when. And then when it comes to the team, this is where you would define what your team looks like. What are the roles and what are the responsibilities of the people that you would need in order to create a successful talent acquisition process. So then when we move to the technology aspect, because that one cannot be forgotten, is we need to look at our system and data architectures. So this is more advanced, I think, than what a small company would need. But this is showing you eventually, this is what you would need to get to have a really robust, successful talent acquisition process. So I think right now, if you're a small company, you would be looking at how do I manage applicants and how do I source them? So let me go out of this edit actually. And then you would be able to select tools to see what the, my internet might be acting funky, sorry. You'd be able to select tools to see what your actual architecture would look like. Okay, let me show you this one. So here you can select from tools that we are offering for you to try out. And so you can really visualize what your future state would be. And then with that, you would need to define what data do you need and what is it? So you'd add some characteristics. This is an example of what a customer did to define it for themselves, but this can again be tailored for your business. And then we would come to, I think what is really exciting is our simulations. So this is where you would actually be able to see the technology that you're trying. So we can do a little bit of a demo. So we want to test, let's say we want to test a standalone tool for now. So we just want to see our applicant tracking system. Let's say we want to use Workable. But go, next step. So you can also add some scenarios that you would want to test. Right now, we just pre-populated one. So I want to look at candidate sourcing. And then a request would be sent to us at TechTorch, and we would provision this simulation for you. So if we give our system integrator, Andy, a moment, then we will be able to see our simulation. In the meantime, does anybody have any questions on how the app works or our methodology? Be happy to answer.
Sam, I think you did a good job of showing and highlighting that you can edit a lot of what it's in the app, a lot of those screens. But there's also examples when there are some things that are not part of our methodology that you might want to have as part of your use case. So it's also useful sometimes to add a page with definitions if you want to involve more people that are not familiar with the new process, or even kind of links to other components of the change that you were about to embark on. So I think Rob had asked that question too. The platform can serve as a good way to collaborate, involve more people, and that as that central point of knowledge and of communication, even beyond what we are providing as kind of the base use case.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another piece of value that I wanted to highlight is it is editable, it is curatable for your business, but I think the value is that we give you a starting point. So it kind of removes the, I think, analysis paralysis aspect of designing and decision making when it comes to doing digital change, because we give you a starting place of where the best companies in the world have done this and how to do it. All right, so I think we are ready. Let's see. All right, so we would go to our simulation, and then you would add your credentials. And so let's say you have a Workable account. You would add your email, your address, and then we would zoom out. And then you can actually go straight to the trial or the free demo from TechTorch. So then here you would log in with those credentials and you would be able to try Workable out. And then you can also go back to TechTorch and ask for a new simulation, and you can try another tool. But so this is my goal with this demonstration, was to show you the basic sections of our use case, how you can edit our app to fit your needs, and how you can use it to showcase what you've designed and the decisions that you've made.
And Sam, does I guess the scenarios get pre-populated in each one of the tools and that you instantiate, right? So that there's two beauties in these, right? You are independent from the vendor, so you don't get phone calls, and you can try different tools, swap them. You can integrate. We sell it to you integrated, but then you showed one scenario. Obviously, we can add many, right? That then get pre-populated in that tool, right?
Yes.
Cool.
Definitely. All right. Now, we will talk about a way that a different type of company can use the same use case to meet their specific needs. So I will hand it over to Andy to showcase this one.
Yep. So for this demo, we're calling it like struggling to source. So again, going back to those themes around talent shortages, mid-sized company who's really saying, hey, we're disappointed in the quality and quantity of applicants. You know, our EVP is struggling, you know, the brand is not super strong, and we have a high percentage of job offer declines. Or maybe to use Rod's example, we have a lot of acceptances and then we have a lot of early departures. So we're not retaining talent. So Sam, I'll share my screen and I'll demo this time.
Sounds good.
See your faces momentarily. Love Teams for that. All right, so you know, I don't want to go too dense in the tool here, but I'll just give you guys some highlights of how we envision users really using this platform. So again, I won't walk through what the content is, but as a mid-sized company who's struggling to source, really what we're trying to zero in on is, okay, so how do we increase our qualified applicant volume? So using that modular approach, we could of course go into the tool if we wanted to, and we can delete these other outcomes and say, hey, we really just want to focus ourselves really in this one area of applicant volume. And so we've got our outcomes, we've got our KPIs. Now we're dropping into our capabilities and saying, hey, where is it most important then within that capability structure? So taking that sort of macro view that Sam had showed us of all of those HR capabilities and saying, hey, really the ones that's most important for us right now is this employer branding. So we can start to use this to have some preliminary thinking around how are we doing in some of these more macro capabilities? How are we from a content perspective and our overall recruitment marketing? You know, we can assign a maturity score. We give you a scale to guide you on that. And really does that connect to our priorities here? So jumping into processes, I think it's natural to say, hey, what do we need to do? Do we have it? You can use our sort of starter perspective to say, what is sort of the basic mechanics of employer branding? Okay, it's, you know, early on, it's really around what is our intended EVP versus how does that really compare to the sentiment that our own employees have, but also potentially using some external market data to look at that. What's that gap? And then how does that drive our goals as an employee brand? And so we can start to walk through these steps to say, hey, we actually don't have a career page. We don't have recruitment assets, and we can start to really test the process, utilizing some of this functionality to say, hey, is this new for us? You know, I'm actually going to change this. This is a new capability for us. And we're going to just sort of start to highlight some of these things. We don't have some of these activities, so we can customize the tool to really allow us to highlight where we need to change. And so one of the things that, you know, can become very apparent is there's actually quite a lot of work that comes with developing robust content to keep on your LinkedIn page, for example, to highlight some of your existing employees to really start to build that brand. And so we're realizing that as we've gone through this journey that our recruiting team is actually quite overworked, right? They don't have the time to do this, right? So again, as we're collaboratively sort of building this, we start to realize we actually need like a recruiting marketer, you know, we need like someone to lead that. So let's say like a recruiter. And we can start to build out what does that role entail. Click over here. Again, going into system architecture, what would be the tools that we need in order to support us? So early on in that process, we said that, hey, we actually want to start to capture a sentiment to understand what is that perspective on our brand. Okay, so how are we going to capture that? We can start to look at what would be those tools we want to use. Where do we want to list our sort of career page? Often this is something that's, you know, embedded in your website, but there's some considerations here around, is it a microsite? Is it a hybrid website with job postings? But we can start to think about how this architecturally comes together, as well as our content creation lifecycle.
And then Andy, so can you maybe explain a little bit how this fits in with the larger talent acquisition system architecture?
Yeah, so sort of your brand is your overarching sort of, let's say, your marketing strategy. And then what really sort of like drives the engine, let's say, is that recruiting content. And so what you really want to make sure is that, one, those values that are coming through in your employer branding are coming through in your recruiting sort of user journey, all the way from the way that you position your brand in your job descriptions, in the way in which you your recruiters articulate the company and engage with those candidates throughout that life cycle, but then also in ways that you're sort of creating those that engagement through those channels. So people following you on LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. So the main ways are going to be intersecting with your ATS. So making sure that when people go to apply, so through your job boards into application, that those things are connected architecturally.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, some of the data elements, what would be that data that goes with it? And again, going into a little bit of what Sam showed us around what would be the simulation of some of these tools, so that we could start to build out that employer brand. I won't click you guys through it since I think it's a lot of content to take in visually. But just a little bit of an example around, hey, we have this 2 companies. One is really just saying, hey, I want the basics. I want to get in my sort of core application system. I want to just make my, the life cycle of interviewing people and serving offers easier, all the way through to, hey, I'm actually maturing in my acquisition journey, and I want to sort of be more intentional about the brand that I put out. I'm going to stop sharing so we can all see each other, or at least
Great.
Sam can see each other.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy, for that demo.
Of course.
So now I think I would open up for additional questions. I know we've gotten some good questions along the way, but if anyone has any comments, or maybe they've experienced some of these aspects of digital change themselves, feel free to jump in.
Maybe I have a question for Andy. You've been working with one of our clients on this example of talent acquisition. What are the key learnings that you got out of walking a small company that was, using my words, duct taping a little bit the acquisition towards more of a digital platform to do talent acquisition?
Yeah, I think this company, as a technical company, I think there's always an inclination to get to the most mature AI-enabled future state as possible. So things like AI-generated sourcing. So I think a lot of the learnings have been, hey, how do we help companies really think about doing the basics well through this lens of scenarios where they have the most friction in their journey? So really having them think about what's the maturity of their existing capabilities, where are they really struggling the most, and then being really prescriptive on, hey, actually what you're spending a lot of time doing is sending and managing your own interview schedules, right? So whether or not that's the platform that will do that for you automatically, having the resourcing and thinking about the people who can do those activities for you. So really getting strong on those sort of core scenarios that are operationally really intensive and time consuming seem to be some of the best wins from a talent perspective. And then targeted sort of outreach. So whether that's through job boards, through paid advertisements, but doing some of those high return marketing activities to sort of attract talent. So those 2, getting the basics really good, alleviating some of that operational weight, and then some thoughtful investment in marketing, in recruitment marketing.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Andy, maybe following up on that, and you can use an example too, but we saw all the great stuff that TechTorch already has kind of prepackaged. How do you adapt, and what do we do to help companies make it more their own, or based on their geography, on their vertical, on their industry?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of sort of walking through that journey with you guys. So if we think a little bit about that intake, it really is around supporting that facilitated guidance around based on your market. So are there unique needs that are specific to your company? And then as well as sort of matching some of those specific goals that you may have, so that we can really sort of tailor the use case and help you focus in on those outcomes and those activities that really drive sort of the most critical path to implementation. But again, sort of just supporting you in that design, in that strategy, and then that design perspective. And then really empowering you to do a lot of that tool testing and selecting. I really think that's an important part that customers really get excited about is, I think I saw Rod comment around that can be quite a game changer, and really the part that's quite exciting. So getting you through some of the painful design parts so that you guys can really enjoy some of that testing and implementation.
And I think I would like to add to that too is when we think about our methodology. So when we would at TechTorch walk you through how to do a change. And the idea is that when we show you how to do this small, modular, bite-sized change, you would be able to repeat that process for other functions and other needs. So it's really about a rinse and repeat, a repeatability aspect of your efforts. So you're getting more out of it than just one single change. It would be really a way of working and a way of learning as a company going forward to embody change into your teams and processes, and to be able to leverage a lot of the learnings that you did with TechTorch that first go around. And I think too, Miguel, so when you think about the specifics of a business, there's a lot of things. So it could be the vertical, like what industry is your business in? What size is your business? And beyond that, it's really like, what are your team needs? So I think when we look at tools, what TechTorch offers as well is the tools that we would show you would be curated to your size and needs. So we wouldn't show something like Workday to a small startup because that wouldn't make very much sense. They wouldn't use that. So the tools that we would show and simulate for you would be specific to your needs.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I was talking to a company actually in Nigeria yesterday, and they were saying how the tax system in Nigeria is extremely complicated when you do payroll, right? So literally, those are their words. Some of the big softwares when it comes to payroll management didn't actually do it for them, and I'm talking big companies, right? And so they were actually looking for smaller, more adapted to developing markets with a little more tricky tax environments. And so that's super important, right? Because the world wastes a lot of time in researching tools and understanding what's good and bad. So what TechTorch does is adapt, curate the tools to your specific needs in your vertical, your size, and your geography, so that you don't have to go through this hassle. And more importantly, then you can test them without having to contact vendors and so forth. So I think super important what you just said, Sam.
Yeah.
This is Rod again. I was going to make a comment and then ask a question. I'd sent a chat comment earlier. I think the TechTorch approach is very unique in that it's, I call it prepackaged, where you have a use case with a list of softwares and some ability to simulate those softwares. And again, I'm used to where you hire a big consulting firm, they come in, tell you what software is available, and I always had the feeling that they were biased on whatever alliances they may have had with certain software companies or what might give them a bigger consulting project, blah, blah, blah. Compare that to an internal IT person in this company coming to say, oh, here's the software we need to do our business. And I always felt that was two ends of the spectrum that never worked. So it kind of leads me to the question, how does TechTorch accumulate their list of software to handle whether it's an HR function or a procurement function, whichever module it might be, and is that list developing?
Sure. So I can start, and then Andy, if you want to add. I think, Rod, on your first point, so I think TechTorch our incentives are aligned with our customers' incentives. Whereas I think currently, I think when you think about consulting firms or system integrator businesses, their incentives aren't necessarily aligned with empowering you and getting you to a place where you can do things yourself. And I think with TechTorch, our entire approach and our purpose is to get companies to a place where they can do it themselves and they're empowered to make decisions and changes. So that's on your first part. And then the second part, as far as our list of vendors and tools, yes, it is definitely evolving. And I would say we have a nice cycle going, I think, with our current customers. We learn a lot based on when we segment our customers. So what size are you? What industry are you in? What tools work best for you? So I would say it's definitely learning and adaptable. And when we look at some of the aspects that we consider to be, when we find tools and we're like, is this a good tool? Does this make sense? We look at a few things. So we look at, I think, our experience. So when we go into the tool and say, is this a nice UI? Does this meet the needs of our customer? We also, I think, take information from other sources, like some review platforms of tools. We take into account, I would say, like pricing. So there's a lot of different aspects that we, I guess, grade and measure our tools and vendors by. And I would say that list is evolving as well as we learn more about specific tools and industries. Andy, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think that was great.
Yeah, that was great. I'll just add, Sam, that I think you said it, but we don't really have, and to Rod's point, any preference of one tool over the other. I think it's based on the customer needs, the specific outcomes they're trying to achieve, and obviously, like you said, Sam, how big they are, how small, what specific segment they're in. That's what determines our suggestions, not any kind of different
Alliance.
remuneration or alliance that we might have with that specific partner.
Sam, we're just about 2 minutes from time. Shall we wrap?
I think so. Well, thank you so much for joining, everybody. I think this was a great discussion, and I think we will definitely be continuing it. So I hope you join us on our continued journey of digital change and changing what that looks like. Have a great day and see you next time.
Thank you.